Okay. Good morning, Peter. Good morning, Ginger.
Well, good evening, Jeanette. 9 time zones away. So here we are across the part of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are very, very happy and honored to have a special guest in this podcast episode, Ginger Lapid-Bogda. Welcome.
Thank you.
Ginger, it's really nice to see you here. I mean, we go back a long way, and this is a little bit different for us, to kind of get online for a podcast that kind of Jeanette initiated. But I know you not just as a friend, but also as a leader in the Enneagram, in the modern Enneagram. And and so I'm very interested to talk to you a little bit and hear your thoughts and your reflections on the development of the Enneagram and how you came to it and were a part of it, what you've noticed over the years, and how things might have changed. Um,
Mhm.
and also, in particular, you've been a leader in the Enneagram in business, which is also the title of your website, enneagraminbusiness.com. So, and you've written a number of great books, I would say, about using the Enneagram in the workplace. And so I see you as really a leader and maybe the leader in the field of the Enneagram in business. And so, and we talk about this a lot, but I just thought it would be fun and interesting to have a conversation in a podcast where other people could kind of hear and get to know you a little bit more and see things about who you are, but also kind of the bigger picture, because I know you're really good at holding the big picture. And you have been concerned, as long as I've known you, about the Enneagram as a movement. And you've been part of that movement. You were the president of the International Enneagram Association for a while, and you still have your hands in and your ears out and your eyes on a lot of this stuff, more than anybody I know, actually. So, would you like to start by, well, you can jump in at any point, anywhere here, but maybe start wherever you want. You want to start with now, or you want to start like at the beginning?
Okay, so I guess I would start by saying it was never my conscious intention to do anything with the Enneagram, nor was it any conscious intention to do anything in terms of being in what you call a leadership role and using the Enneagram in organizational spaces. Um, and even to this day, I probably say that's not my conscious intention either. That's not what I'm all about. It's not what drives me. It's not actually very interesting to me to be that person. But then sometimes life has a certain path and it presents itself. And then I'm not one to sort of back off a path that's there. So if I go back to how I never planned for this and still don't actually, I do planning, but it's not for whatever. So I I was an organization development consultant to some extent still am for 25 years. So I was pretty senior in this space and I did a lot of training, but mostly consulting. I'm also PhD'd in education. So like I have a lot of schooling, if you will, and practice in teaching, training design, teaching design, etc. And then because of those early days in the OD training spaces, coaching is something we always did with our clients, though it wasn't a profession that was particularly well known at the time. So, but using sort of concepts and practices from consulting and some borrowed from therapeutic environments, we figured out how to do coaching. And it's actually most of the things that are still used to this day. So I've been in those fields for a very long time. So if I go to 1992, 3 or so, 4, I had worked for a while in different capacities at Esalen Institute, which is a growth center in Northern California. And I had a lot of friends who worked there, and I'd been to a lot of programs, and it was my go-to place for a vacation because the food was great. The hot tubs were really good. The massages were excellent. and they had programs offered. So, if the program I was going to wasn't that exciting to me, I didn't care because I could still enjoy the food and the massages and the hot tubs. Okay. And the people. So this particular time I wanted to go, the only thing that was offered, it was my vacation spot. Plus I had a young son, so I didn't have lots of discretionary. He was really young. So my discretionary time was limited. So during that time, the only thing that was offered at the time when I was free that I hadn't been to was something on the Enneagram. So I just signed up for it. And who was leading it but Helen Palmer, but I did not have a clue who Helen Palmer was then. So it's marked as a beginning session, and I sign up because I'm a beginner, and we have to have her book, The Enneagram. So I'm reading that book, and I get to the meeting space early, and it's at the Roundhouse in Esalen, which is where Fritz Perls used to hold his sessions, right on the hill. And there are pillows against the wall, and I'm sitting there by myself, getting there early, and a woman comes in, and I don't know who she is, and she comes over to me. She's rather small, but I'm sitting down. I mean, I'm on the floor, and she puts her hand out, and she says, I don't know you, but I like you. And I go, no, that's really weird. Like, who is this person? Then it turned out that was Helen.
Yeah.
If you know Helen, that's a pretty Helen thing to do, right?
Yeah, that's pretty
It is,
Helen,
yes.
yes.
Okay. So I go, it's a 5-day program, and it's actually an advanced program. So everybody there pretty much knows their type but me. So I'm scrambling to, sort of find a way to have, like, I thought I was a 4, because actually I'm not a 4, I'm a type 2, but 4 was an overlay on my 2.
Yeah.
And it was good enough for them, right?
Right.
And it was then that I met certain people. I met actually Terry Saraceno there. All right. So then I decided after the program, now this is how I got into this whole thing. So I left the session after 5 days, and it's a beautiful day, and I'm looking over the Pacific Ocean, and I see a blimp or a dirigible in the sky, and it says, with a little sign, but it's actually not there. It's in my mind.
Right.
And it says, your job is to bring the Enneagram out more into the world. I'm like, I say, that's not my plan. And it comes back the second time, and it says, doesn't matter what your plan is. I'm not a very planful person either in a lot of ways, but it certainly was not on my horizon, but now it's in my horizon. So I say, okay, what am I supposed to do? And it comes back a third, final time. It says, just be still. It will become obvious. Like, fine. So then I decide to go because I like the Enneagram, and I'm only planning to, now, by this time I decided it's past. I thought it was a cult, which I am totally not into. And then I decided, well, there's something really to this. So I decided to go off to the training, Helen and David's training program. Now, had Don Riso been teaching the session at Esalen, I would have gone to his session, right? That's how, it's not that intentional on my part, right? Neither was the Enneagram. So I go into the program, the certification program. Okay, now part of that was you had to, at that point, type 10 people on your own, or 20, I forget. And 2 of them had to be recorded. And then you had to lead a type panel in person and do a typing interview in person. Okay, so this is like really weird. So that's so funny. So I picked Peter and Terry because I'd met Peter at one of the sessions and liked him. Peter and Terry were secondary players in the teaching. They were the secondary faculty then. Helen and
Right.
David were the primaries, right? Remember that?
They were the
Peter?
next team that was drafted in right after Helen and David.
Okay.
They needed
So
help.
I was like, but there were other people that I could have picked, but I picked both of them. And I go, I don't have a lot of time for this, and I don't want to spend 4 months. So I do my typing interviews, record them, and I picked both of them because nobody said you couldn't have 2. Nobody said you had to have 1 person just doing it in those days. So, all right. So I'll just say that. So then I got to know Peter and I got to know Terry. And then I'll just leave this part of the story out. So nope, delete that, Ginger. Don't say that. Okay. So then I go into my typing interview in person, and the person, I think I'm pretty facile, I mean, I've been through a lot of psychological and spiritual work. And okay, so I'm hoping for an interesting client. and the person comes into the room and he says, I'm a 3. Let's see if she could figure it out. And I'm like, oh, great. First of all, he's going to play games with me. And secondly, he already knows his type, plus everything that I saw about him, body language. I pay attention to all these variables, like not just what they say, but how they talk and how they look. Right? It's not they look, but their body structures and how they respond to things and their tone of voice and all these variables all at the same time. So he's sitting down and he seems like a 3 to me, right? And I'm asking him the question. So I'm like, oh, how am I gonna make this? I forget how long. It was an hour, supposed to take an hour then or something. Like I was done in a half hour because he was pretty obvious. But I also knew that he thought he was a 3 and I thought he was a 3. So what do I do now? Because I know I'm not going to pass it if I don't spend the hour. And I'm also bored. So what I do, Peter knows me well. What do I do when I'm bored? I get myself into things. So I decided I'm going to figure out what his subtype is. Because even though I hadn't been trained very much, because Peter knew a lot about subtypes, but he wasn't teaching it. And Helen and David weren't teaching subtypes much then. Do you remember that, Peter?
Yeah, I remember. It wasn't much part of the training back then.
But because I had to lead a subtype panel, I had gone through every book I could find on subtypes that was in English and done a matrix and what all the different people said. So I actually had a good feel for the subtype. So I'm like, I'm bored. I got to do something. What else am I going to ask this guy? So I start like trying to figure this out. So anyway, I forget what his subtype was, but so my feedback was I did a good typing interview, but I went beyond the boundaries and should not have asked about subtypes. Peter was not the person giving me the feedback. We'll just
I would tell you that, right?
You would not have said that. You would have said, go for it, right?
Right.
Okay.
And then at what point did you say, okay, I'm going to start working with this or teaching this?
Well, see, this is where I didn't plan it. So if you remember so I had to type all these people as part of my certification. Yeah. So I just moved to Los Angeles, and although I had a lot of relatives there, I don't really advise typing your relatives, at least not in my family system.
Right.
It's like strangers are much better, right? So,
right.
So where am I going to find these strangers in a city that I just moved to? Because I just gotten married. And I didn't find my husband's friends particularly interesting. So, I got to have something. So I used my clients because I had a lot of clients at the time. Now, then I realized later on I was a 2, but so my clients, I'm traveling, various parts of the country, and will you let me type you? And so they're all giving me an hour, and I'm doing typing, practicing on them. I'm giving them Helen's book as a gift, right? I don't feel like I can ask for an hour of their time and not give them something, right? That's not my way. So then a lot of my clients started asking me how I could use it in coaching them or in working with them on their teams. And that's how I got into that business aspect of it. See, because I was never going to do that.
Right. But you were invited in and pulled in,
by my clients who saw the value of it.
Right. And so I'm assuming that it worked well, that people liked it. And
well, obviously they liked it. Plus, then I started developing tools because I've helped them do that. Then that was the beginning of the training tools, which now they have their early iterations then, and they're much more sophisticated now, but start out with 3 or 4 tools that I was using to work with clients who had asked me to do it on their behalf. Now I have 30, right? It's like, okay, fine with that. But see, it's all kind of reluctant. So then, how was this? Then the story of so now I'm working in organizational settings. So then I go to an AIA conference and I do a presentation at a pre-conference, one of 3, on how to use interaction in teaching, because I'm watching all these Enneagram teachers lecture. And I'm thinking, that's all they know how to do. Like, why are they doing that? Here's real people. And so now I'm also trained in the narrative tradition, which I've taken to mean in my own way, having people share their own stories.
Right. That's the basis of the narrative is people's, engaging people in the conversation and hearing their stories and not
and
all
drawing
about
themes from their stories and illuminating insights from them. Okay, so I'm all for that. Like, I'm as narrative in that sense as you can be, Right. So, but the trick was, how do you get people to share their own stories in a way that's safe and risky at the same time, and that people are typed accurately, because people are inaccurately typed. They may share their story, but it's the wrong story for that type. It's a right story, or it's their story, but they've learned about the type, so they made it fit to that type, but it isn't that type. So, I've been early on, like, typing is so important, accurate typing. So, yeah. So I do this. So I'm sort of, the way I deal with things that I get frustrated with is I try to teach people something about it. So I do this session on interactive Enneagram. And I think there were like, I don't know, 300 people at this conference. Memories it was at Menlo Park. Anyway, in California. So you don't have to go to the pre-conference, but I had like probably 120 people at this pre-conference session. Everybody wants to know how to do it interactively. So I'm teaching them interactively how to do interaction, right? Because okay, instead of lecturing them on interaction. Okay, so after the session, I had just come from a client and I had some of my training tools, the preliminary ones. So people said, well, what do you use? What kind of things do you use? And I go, well, I showed them because I had them in my briefcase. So then afterwards, I got bombarded with people on stage saying, we want to buy these. How much are they? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't sell them. Well, I don't care. So I got people just throwing money at me and taking whatever I had. I have no idea. I just came back with a bunch of money. And I said, okay, that's a message.
Well, that's a good sign, right?
There's a message, right? Remember, but I have this blimp saying it'll become clear. So then
Write the blimp. It was correct.
I'm writing the blimp. See, this is part of the blimp. So then what happens is the IEA, I get approached by the IEA board to be on their board.
Yeah.
And I go, what?
What year are we talking now? Just
Oh, I think we're early on. We're like in the late 1990s.
okay.
Okay, I'm approached. Okay, and I go, well, why would you want me to be on the board? Well, you did such a great session. And I go, but being a great presenter, whether I am or not, doesn't mean I'd be a really great board member. Right? That's not how you select board members. But I have an organizational background. Well, they don't seem to care. So I think it took another year or two, but I did decide to join the board. The board was not really functioning that effectively. I'll leave all those details out, but eventually I became the president of the IEA. But I became the president because the rules were that only you had to be a board member for a certain number of years, and there were only 2 of us who qualified, and the other person never showed up at meetings. You see what I say? It really wasn't my intention.
Well, you got pulled in once again, right?
Yeah, how that works. I mean, it's like a little vortex for me. Now,
Right.
you can make a case that I put myself in situations where that's going to happen.
Right.
Unconsciously. I mean, I get that.
Right.
I am a social subtype 2. It's
Right.
called ambition. It's about doing something big for systems or causes, and, becoming a leader and influencer without acting like you sweated or you wanted it or something. So I look at that. Okay. So anyway, now I'm the president of the board.
So now you have a bigger view on what's happening with the
Well,
Enneagram.
during that time, yeah, see, because now I've trained with Helen and David, and I have good rapport with them, right? I'm one of theirs. That's what they used to say. And then I did meet, so I got to know Don, Riso, and Russ, and I can't tell you what this was in the detail. It'd be more interesting to say because it's confidential. But I'm on the board, and at that time on the board, there was a perception that there were Helen and David's people, and then there were people, equal numbers, but Don and Russ's people, and then there might be a neutral person or 2, right? And then Palmer Daniels people were always supposed to side with the Palmer Daniels, and Don Riso always that. It was supposed to all be confidential, and everybody knew it wasn't. So everybody's going back, like, okay. So something came up on the board that one of the other teachers had an issue with Don, and that teacher wanted us to investigate and take Don on about it. I won't tell you who did it and what the issue was, because and so the board's spending all this time talking about this, and I go, finally, I'm tired. This conversation's totally boring me, right? And I'm like, this is not working. So I say, Peter, do you want to say something? No. Okay. So I finally say after about an hour in, okay, look, let's just suppose that we found out that what this teacher is complaining about Dawn is true. But we don't even know that yet. Okay. Let's just suppose. What would we do about it?
Right. Hard to come up with that.
Oh, jaws were like, well, they realized that there's nothing. I said, there is nothing we could or would do about it. And this teacher has a lot of avenues to approach Dawn if he wants to, or she wants to, that don't involve us, but we wouldn't do, but there's nothing we could or would or could do if it were true. And we don't even know that. Hence, I think we should drop it.
Well, it's a good thing you were there. And by the way, over time, kind of fast forwarding a little bit, my experience of you was that you actually befriended most, not all, but most of the major Enneagram teachers. You became close to Don and Russ. You stayed connected to Helen and David. You also connected with Claudia Rano, which I think was
and
a big feat.
Kathy and Theodore. But see, the thing
Right.
with Don, how we got close was I didn't actually befriend him. He befriended me. See, so what happened was, somebody on the board who was a Riso Hudson person, I didn't even know who, told Don what I did
Right.
in this confidential board meeting that wasn't confidential, but I didn't do it so it would get back to Don. I just did it because I thought it was ridiculous. So, and it could have gone back. Okay. So then Don calls me and he goes, I heard what you did and I believe I can really trust you. And that was the beginning of multiple years of a very close bonding friendship with Don, where we would talk on the phone on a regular basis, for, 2 to 3 hour phone calls on all kinds of different topics. Now, Russ and I are friendly and everything, but I was never I was really close to Don. I mean, one point, Russ approached me and said, Don really cares about you and he really trusts you. And so I don't really know you. So I want to go out to dinner with you and so I can get to know you. Now, Russ is known for likes to go out to fancy restaurants and he's probably, get to being taken.
And you love your food too.
Huh?
You love good food too.
Yeah, but I don't like going to, there's a difference between expensive and good. And I think Russ likes expensive and that's good. And I like good no matter what the price. Okay. But let me just say this. We're at the conference and he says this and I go, okay, I can be cheeky. I go, okay, Russ, this is good, but it's just you and me. So if you invite anybody else, you have to pay for everybody. If I invite anybody else, I have to pay for everybody. If we don't invite anybody else, we figure out who pays, right? So we meet for dinner and it's just the two of us. And he actually treated me. It was funny. Okay. So now that began my friendship with Ross, which I do have. And then let's see. Oh, I know what it was. Oh, Kathy Hurley and Theodore, I had a very close relationship, but this has to do with another story. This has to do with Claudia.
So let me just say, Kathy Hurley and Theodore
Dobson.
Right.
Because they were like the third wheel of the
dynamic. They were like authors, right? And they were part of the IEA, founding the IEA, right?
So now at one point before I'm the IEA president, I'm the co-chair of the IEA conference along with Judith Searle. And we both lived in Santa Monica and nobody wanted to be the conference chair that year. So Judith and I said over lunch, we'll volunteer to ourselves, but the board has to go hands off. We do whatever we want. Now, I can be pretty powerful. I understand that and be, have a force. But Judith is like, you don't get on, you make an agreement with Judith, you do not renege on that, right? So Judith chairs with the board. What that is, and they say okay because they don't know what else to do. So then Judith and I say, we're another lunch. We're gonna invite Claudio. She knew Claudio because she'd been trained. I didn't know him. So she reaches out to Claudio. And everybody in the IEA, of course, Claudio's gonna say no. We didn't even tell them ahead of time because he didn't come to the Stanford conference. So Judith reaches out and he says yes.
Well, I was
Yeah,
at that conference and it was quite a scene, you know what I mean? It was Claudio and his people, and then there was, he's coming back in after many years of kind of being off doing his own thing. He's kind of, in a way, not joining, that's too big a word, but his presence alone, makes an impression. And so I
no,
remember very
okay.
well,
So
his
yeah,
speech
no,
and his
yeah. Well,
presence.
there's a story to that too. So what happens then is Judith and I are at another lunch in Santa Monica, and we say, okay, how are we going to get people to stay at the conference? Because they're going to come. Claudio's a big draw, but what's going to keep them there? So we come up with this idea of a children's panel, children between 10 and 13, facilitated hopefully by David Daniels.
I remember him talking about it.
Okay. No, this again, it gets funny. So we decide that I should call David because I know him better than Judith does. So I called David because my son was in that age group and he had a lot of friends and we knew their types. And Peter had 2 kids and we knew we could get them right or get, at least 2 of them, whoever. And I had some clients who had twins that were really great. So anyway, so I called David and asked him, okay, now I have to just show you this. So I asked David if he wants to do it, and he starts yelling at me. So I have to hold my phone like this, just so away from my ear. Well, you can't see the going thought at the time was you shouldn't be teaching type or working with kids that young because it would harm their little psyches, yada yada. Okay. So I never believed that. My son didn't seem harmed by it, and his friends knew their types, and they seemed to like working with it. And so I finally said to David, after he stopped yelling, it's hard to imagine David yelling unless you've heard David yelling. And then
Right.
you can imagine
Didn't
it.
yell a lot, but I guess you got yelling.
So I say, well, David, Judith and I, now this is the truth, but you could hear it as too-ish flattery, okay? But I really say to David, look, David, Judith and I really think you would be the best person to do this because A, you're really good at leading panels, and B, your presence would help the children feel really comfortable up there. However, if you don't want to do that, Judith and I are pretty committed to doing it. We'll find somebody else who would be comfortable doing it. David says, oh, I'll do it. David says, oh, I'll do it.
Well, it sounds a little bit like manipulation, but
It wasn't at the time, you see, because it was the truth. He said, no, he's screaming. I'm saying, okay, fine, we'll find somebody else.
yeah.
And he turns around and goes, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Right.
I didn't know him well enough to manipulate that, really.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that
What I
would.
hear in that story, that's a great story, is one, here something about David and his ambivalence, you know what I mean? And maybe he needed to kind of yell about it for a while just to kind of clear some space. And two, you were one of the people that could kind of hang in there with him, and you were not deterred. He's yelling at you, you've got the phone away, and you gonna make this happen. You're gonna keep on going. And so credit to you for staying in there.
So anyway, I hate being yelled at, by the way. Like it's
Oh,
like,
sure. Well, ooh, right. Yeah, but you hung in there. So,
all right, I'm in a role though, so I have to put up with it if it were interpersonal.
right.
Okay, so next comes a call from Kathy Hurley. Getting my prop out again. I had to hold the phone further away. She's screaming at me. How dare we invite Claudio Naranjo
Oh,
to be a, blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, we did because Judith and I thought that would be, well, everything I say, she's screaming. So she's screaming and I'm letting her scream. And then she stops screaming. And then she says, Ginger, the thing I really like about you is that I can have a good conversation with you. I'm thinking, this was not a conversation. This was you screaming at me. However, I really like Kathy. She was.
well, you know that you pushed a lot of buttons by inviting Claudio Naranjo because he had been dissing everybody else teaching the Enneagram for years because it wasn't his thing, and he was the only guy that could really do the right thing. And you know what I mean? And of course, he was a brilliant guy and had wonderful contributions. But other people
True.
teaching the Enneagram were like, he's been dissing us for years. Why do you want to have him at the conference?
Right. But the other thing is, he told us why he didn't say yes to the Stanford conference.
Uh-huh.
The why? He'd been asked to be a presenter, but not a keynoter. And he felt it was disrespectful. And when we
Well,
asked him to be a keynoter.
right. Okay. So you had the right understanding and emotional intelligence, social
Well,
intelligence.
we didn't know beforehand. That's why he'd said no. We only
Right.
found out after he said yes. Then Judith and I got curious as to why. You see?
Well,
So
anyway, great conference, by the
it
way.
was a
And
conference.
IA conferences, I appreciate every conference I've ever been to, but some have been more, impactful and exciting than others. And this was a very impactful conference. Not because I liked Claudio at all. I was very kind of pissed off at his speech. For how he was describing the other teachers because he kept at it in his presentation. But it was interesting and it was inclusive and it was, there was impact. Plus, the children's panel was awesome. And, there's still clips available of part of that children's panel available on the internet, by the way. And if anyone wants to track it down, it's really lovely to look at. And David is in top form. And the kids were like, you could see the types without any of the wrongness or the neurosis or the ego. It was pure coming from them. And my two daughters were there, and as well as your son, and just a lovely, lovely group of kids who could speak clearly and simply, and obviously the type was showing up in a beautiful way, and that shifted
So
something.
you want to know why Claudio took a liking to me?
If you like.
Because I think it's an interesting story around the Enneagram space.
Okay.
I don't think it's about me. I think a bigger story. All right. So the IA board had decided that I should help. Well, we were going to host a dinner for him, the board, and a couple of the people he brought with him. And we're all in Santa Monica, and my second husband had a membership to a beach club that had pretty good food. And if you remember, it wasn't that expensive. So we're looking to not spend like tons of money. So I arranged this nice dinner, and we had it at a beach club, but it was like in a little gazebo right on the beach, right in Santa Monica. It's very okay and affordable because of it's like if you're in a club, you pay for the membership, which he did. Okay, so anyway, he drives down there from the hotel. It's like 5 minutes down the incline with Judith Searle in her car. But on the way down, her car gets overheated. So she's stuck now at the bottom of the Highway 1 with her overheated car. And we somehow get Claudio to get to the beach club, right? I saw it, we made with caravan. So we have this nice dinner, and somebody's got to bring Claudio back. And so, of course, it's me, right? Because I'm the host, and okay, why not? All right, I have a car because I'm local. So we're driving back, and Claudio says to me, "How do you think I'm going to be received at the conference?" And I say, "Well, most of the people are going to be really excited and happy you're there, and there will be some people who are not. But they're going to be in the back of the room, and they won't say anything during your speech, so don't worry about it." I'm not worried about
Came
it.
very close. I just want you to know I came very close to jumping
But I
off.
knew you wouldn't, and I knew you wouldn't. So he said, "Thank you for telling me the truth," because I asked some other people who were part of the IEA everybody's all excited. And he said, "I didn't believe them, but I believe you."
Okay.
So
Well,
then he decided that I was a person that he could trust.
okay. Well,
So then the commentary, but that's basically how I got to be on Super League, I think, close terms with some of the people who were kind of really prominent during that time.
right. And I appreciate that, by the way. I mean, again, you brought people together. You were trusted by enough people and you helped people connect and, kind of I mean, I just appreciated your social intelligence and your social leadership through all those years. and you're still doing it, but maybe it's perhaps it's somewhat different direction. Can we jump forward now and because I do want to ask you kind of what do you see with the Enneagram in general, and what do you see in terms of the Enneagram in the workplace? What's your reading on that? What do you like about the kind of what's happening? I think you know more about what's happening in the Enneagram world than anybody else I know. So what do you see in all this?
Well, what's coming to me is, I mean, I still hold both Don and Claudia, who are no longer alive. I hold them in my heart and in my mind. And sort of my view of their perspectives on the Enneagram. So Claudia was concerned about the superficialization and commercialization of the Enneagram. And he wasn't wrong about that he was deeply, deeply concerned about that. Don was really concerned about the ethics of use of the Enneagram. But Don would say, when we'd have conversations around some of the ethical issues that we were perceiving in the space, he would say, he'd always say it like this: Ginger, always start with my name. Ginger, don't worry about that. The Enneagram is bigger than any of us. So I hold those two perspectives in my mind and in my heart.
Dear listener or viewer, we'll conclude this part of our podcast interview with these beautiful words from Ginger. Let's take a moment to reflect on them, along with the profound concerns shared by Naranjo with her about the growing superficiality and commercialization of the Enneagram, and by Don Riso about its ethical application, or perhaps more accurately, the lack thereof. Part 2 of Ginger's story will be published separately, diving even deeper into her remarkable journey and insights and stories. Be sure to stay tuned for this continuation. You won't want to miss it. And remember, this podcast is also available as a video on YouTube. Links to watch it can be found on either Peter's website, theenneagramAtWork.com, and at thenarrativetradition.com. Thank you for joining us today.